Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the Strategic Innovation Fund Challenge 2, which is novel technical process and market approaches to deliver an equitable and secure net zero power system.
The Strategic Innovation Fund is investing £450 million in energy network innovation. Because the challenge of rapidly decarbonising our energy networks is enormous. But we can do this. With collaboration, we can make the leap. A giant leap together. We need the bravest, brightest, boldest change makers from across the world to work with Innovate UK, Ofgem and the Strategic Innovation Fund to create the energy networks of the future. The best ideas targeted at the most pressing challenges that reduce emissions and save consumers money. Join us now. Take a giant leap together with the Strategic Innovation Fund at ofgem.gov.uk.
Thanks, Beth, and afternoon, everybody. My name's David Richardson. I'm Head of Innovation for the Strategic Innovation Fund at Innovate UK. Thank you for all joining the Challenge 2 webinar this afternoon, particularly those of you that have already been through the main launch last week and potentially the Challenge 1 webinar this morning. A few bits of quick housekeeping. You will be muted during the event, but please use the Q&A box to ask any questions. We've got plenty of time saved for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Do introduce yourselves using the chat box. I can see some of you already are already. And the event is being recorded, so you will be sent a link to the recording along with the slides afterwards. If we could move on. We've got quite a packed agenda for you this afternoon. We'll be going through this Strategic Innovation Fund structure before I hand over to Beth to talk about Challenge 2. And we're then going to go into a bit more detail about partnership requirements before handing over to Keith Bell from Strathclyde University to talk about why this challenge is vital to achieving net zero. And we've also got Richard Knight from the Power Networks Demonstration Centre to talk about what has been done to date in relation to the challenge and where the innovation gaps are in relation to the networks for achieving an equitable and secure net zero power system. Finally, we'll talk to you about how to get involved in the whole process, how you can submit your ideas and engage with the networks, and finish up with a Q&A. If we could skip on. So very quickly, since you may have heard this before in the other webinars, just a reminder that the Strategic Innovation Fund operates on a three-phase process. We're just at the start of this for round 3. We've launched the challenges, they've been published last week, and now we're looking for ideas to move into the discovery phase. Discovery is 150,000 funding available for each of the projects. They're 3 months long and really focus on understanding a problem in a lot of detail, engaging with users and understanding the needs of users, and assessing the range of potential solutions to that problem. After that phase, successful projects will be reapplying into Alpha, which is 6 months long and £500,000 of funding available. That's when we really expect initial prototyping of the solution to start before moving into the beta phase, where it scales up to large scale, nationally significant demonstration projects. All the proposals put in a discovery phase should have the potential to be able to progress all the way to beta and onwards into business as usual afterwards. Though, of course, as you can see, we do have a funnel and a reduction in the number of projects over the course of that. Next slide, please. So a very quick reminder that the Strategic Innovation Fund is for the regulated and licensed energy networks, both gas distribution and transmission, as well as electricity transmission and distribution, and also the electricity system operator. I've already mentioned the 3 phases, but the benefits that we're really looking to achieve through Strategic Innovation Fund projects are financial cost reductions realized in energy bills, but also reductions in costs of network operator and the cost of network users like generators and demand users. We're looking to reduce carbon emissions, particularly in this challenge, where we're really focused on enabling the delivery of a net zero power system in 2035. We're looking to improve the access to revenues for users of network services, which could be revenues from flexibility or other types of services. And ultimately, we want to deliver new, novel products, processes, and services into the UK energy markets. Next slide. And over to you, Beth.
So I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm Beth Foster. I'm one of the innovation leads here at the Strategic Innovation Fund, and I'm going to talk through very briefly about Challenge 2, because we do have some guest speakers today, Keith Bell and Richard Knight, who are going to take this challenge in a little bit more depth. So let's kick off. Novel technical process and market approaches to deliver an equitable and secure net zero power system. I'll give you a bit of context to the challenge first. So over the last 2 decades, Great Britain has delivered the fastest decarbonising power system of all major economies globally. But as of 2020, 40% of installed capacity and 30% of generation was still coming from fossil fuels. And it kind of begs the question, why are we still including fossil fuels in the energy sector? And that's because the energy networks legally have to provide energy security to consumers all year round. And it can be quite tricky to do that purely with renewables just because of their intermittent nature. And we can't, we can't allow that kind of risk to our consumers. So the question is, how do we supply clean electricity during the most challenging periods of demand, to say winter, when renewable generation might happen to be low and fossil fuel generation is high? There's been a lot of research in this area, and the research findings support the use of long duration energy storage to provide flexibility and to help manage those high periods of demand. But also, if you were attending our webinar this morning about Challenge Area 1, how do we increase the rollout of assets to meet our net zero needs? There's also going to be lots of risks surrounding system resilience, coordination, and vulnerability to cyber attack as we start to digitalize all of our assets and increase the number of assets we connect to the system. So let's cut to the chase. What does this mean for you, our innovators? And what does this mean for people wanting to enter the SIF program? Well, there's 4 areas that we'd like you to focus your innovation on. And the first one is novel market and technical approaches to cost effectively minimize renewable energy curtailment. How do we keep hold all of that excess renewable energy that enters the network, which is often lost? The second area would be leveraging disruptive computing technologies for improving system visibility, performance, and cybersecurity. As a physicist, this is really exciting for me. I get insight into all of these amazing cutting edge digital technologies that we could bring into the energy sector. So how do we create better visibility so that we can control the network and react to sudden peaks in demand? That links into the third area, which is effectively managing peak demand and stability through increased flexibility, including over longer time periods, really hinting at that long duration storage technology piece there. And number 4, how do we enable disadvantaged consumer segments to participate in flexibility markets and benefit from novel low carbon technologies? And that's not necessarily disadvantaged in terms of poverty. It could be disadvantaged in terms of location, in terms of building type, in terms of access to different types of technologies. How do we bring them into the market? How do we get them to participate? So these 4 innovation focuses are going to hopefully deliver these following outcomes. A reduction at gigawatt hour scale, the amount of renewable energy curtailed annually, We want to demonstrate greater use of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. And we want to increase the number of consumers across the segments, both regional, spatial, income, and other key socio-demographic indicators participating in those markets. Next slide, please. This is quite a meaty slide. I'm not going to go through all of it. I'm going to focus on the discovery partner requirements. So if you are familiar with the SIF or you attended this morning's webinar, you'll know that the energy network must lead your project. However, we do look for partners to join in who perhaps might have quite a significant part in leading some of the outcomes. So if you're targeted towards scope 1, which is novel market and technical approaches to cost effectively minimize renewable energy curtailment, for discovery, the requirements are that you have on board an organization with a specialist expertise in energy market economics, or a technology provider or developer of energy system assets, both the hardware and the software. For scope 2, leveraging disruptive computing technologies, we want you to have on board a technology developer or a research organization with a primary focus of developing computing and digital technologies. For scope 3, we're pretty open-minded about who you bring on board, as long as you present a really strong justification case as to why your project partner can help deliver the outcomes related to that innovation challenge. And scope 4, enabling disadvantaged consumer segments to participate in flexibility markets. Well, we want a consumer representative group or a relevant local government entity. Next slide, please. So what is the role of the energy networks? Why do they need to lead? Well, quite often they're the problem owner for energy sector decarbonisation, and they have high capability as well as interest to deploy innovation, and they have high alignment with the business needs strategy. The project partners sit kind of in the middle. They have high interest in the innovation. Their role may be quite varied in the project, but they have certainly potential future alignment with the business needs or strategy, particularly as you move along in the innovation phase in the SIF. And then we have the project stakeholder as well. They have access to the relevant data that's needed to carry out the innovation or research, and they are potential recipients of the project outputs. There is one thing to note, that even though the energy network may be the project lead, some of the project partners might be sort of the de facto delivery lead as well. But the key thing is that the energy network is in there. Next slide, please. So, as you may be aware, the round 3 challenges have launched. The next 2 challenge webinars will be on Monday the 5th. The call for ideas are now open. They opened today, and the link for the call for ideas platform will be provided in the project pack at the end of this webinar. The call for ideas closes on the 11th of August, 2023. And then the application submission window for the energy networks opens on the 4th of September and closes on the 22nd of November. And the projects kick off on the 1st of March, 2024. Feel free to take a quick screenshot of that slide if you need to. Next slide, please. So there's a number of funding alignment opportunities for Challenge 2. We recognise that not all innovation projects may come through the SIF, but there are loads of programmes across Innovate UK and in the energy sector that we align with. So we have Innovate UK's Bridge AI programme for digital innovators, working in other sectors, so agriculture, construction, transport. We also align with that. I believe that the Bridge AI programme applications are open at the moment, and they align with our round 3 challenges. We also have the Innovate UK Net Zero Living programme. They recently announced the winners from phase 1 and are about to announce the Oh, so the Net Zero Living Digital Accelerator Round 1 is also open for applications. We also have the Innovate UK's Future Economy, the SME Investor Partnerships Round 2, and also specific to the markets, which is relevant to this particular challenge, we have the Alternative Energy Department for Energy Security and Net Zero's Alternative Energy Markets. They announced the winners yesterday. So if you are interested in this challenge, do have a read up about what's already being done in the sector and you know, before you apply into the SIF. Next slide, please. I'm now going to hand over to Keith Bell, who is the holder of the Scottish Power Chair in Future Power Systems at the University of Strathclyde, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about this particular challenge. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you very much, Bethany, and thanks everyone. Nice to see you this afternoon. So I'm going to be saying next slide quite a lot here, because or next thing, since I've got a few animations in, which I should have probably taken out. But here's the context, okay? So as Bethany has already outlined, one of the big challenges we face is about, well, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and the energy system is a big source of greenhouse gases. So we've got to decarbonize that energy system. And the Climate Change Committee, of which I'm a member, has put out quite a lot of work related to this, and in particular as part of the advice on the 6th carbon budget from a year or two ago. And a particular thing worth looking at, I think, is the balanced pathway. It's not a prescription as such, but it's an illustration of this being perfectly viable as part of action across the whole economy. And in respect of energy, we can see a massive transition there away from use of fossil fuels to use of electricity. And that electrification of the end use of energy enables a big advantage in energy efficiency. Hence, you can see the total energy use reducing over time. But of course, the question then is, where is that electricity coming from? So the total electrical energy production increases significantly. I mean, depending on the precise scenario that you look at, something like twice or 3 times, meeting that demand that you can see on the bottom right. And if we go to the next slide, we can zoom in on how that demand is changing. And it's in particular in respect of energy in buildings, heat especially, which we use a lot of gas to serve right now, and in surface transport, they're basically cars, moving away from combustion engine vehicles towards electric vehicles. Also electrification of industry, large industrial processes, and not only large, but also smaller manufacturing processes as well. Okay, we go to the next slide. Now, it's not just about a 2050 target. There's a target for 2035, which was advised by the CCC and has been adopted by the UK government. Extremely challenging because it's so close. And we could think of broadly 2 phases of transition for our energy system and the electricity system in particular, which is reduction of the emissions intensity of electricity production up towards 2035 and trying to meet that goal, and already having started by the mid-2030s, but continuing and ramping up all the way to 2050, a massive expansion of the electricity system as we electrify a large part of end use of energy. Okay, the next slide, please. Now, you can see there what that means in terms of investment. This is a chart from Atkins. The annual investment in new generation capacity far outstripping anything we've done before. So how do we unlock that investment? And you can see, especially out to 2035, as we replace all of our pretty much all of our fossil fuel production of electricity. And how do we ensure that energy users benefit from what has been a spectacular reduction in the long run cost of energy from renewables, while at the same time ensuring that the supply of energy is reliable? And that implies something about the system, the electricity system, and then as part of a bigger energy system. And the other challenges that have been announced today link into other parts of the energy system. So what about the system cost? It's not only about the long run cost of energy production. Okay, on the next slide. So this is a bit of a tricky slide. I'll try and explain what I'm getting at here, and it picks up 1 or 2 of the things that Bethany was outlining already. The dashed line or lines represent the hourly demand for electricity, but I've sorted them from the smallest on the right to the biggest on the left. And we could talk about this as being the load duration curve or demand duration curve. So you can see how much of the time the demand for electricity is above a certain level. However, when we've got this zero marginal cost, but highly variable resource of wind and solar and a bit of hydro, we want to make maximum use of that beautiful, cheap, low carbon resource. But its variability in time presents some challenges. Now, if instead of taking just the demand in each hour, we take the residual demand, the difference between that demand and the available energy in that hour from wind, solar, and hydro, we see the solid lines. And again, I've sorted those residual demands from the smallest on the right to the biggest on the left. And we can see there, we've still got a challenge of something else to meet that peak residual demand. And in pushing the button again, there's that volume of energy to meet from something other than renewables. So what's that going to be? Where, you know, and probably suggests a role for some kind of storable low carbon fuel, or if we're going to use a fossil fuel, we've got to capture the CO2. And pushing the button again a couple of times, then we see that area under the curve, which is actually times of surplus, when there's more renewable energy available than looks like we can make use of at that time. So there's an opportunity there for example, electrolysis to manufacture hydrogen that you could store. Otherwise, you have to curtail that output. So one of the sort of market challenges, if you like, is how do you meet the peak residual demand at least cost, but also minimize the total cost of that curtailment. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. Now, of course, what I did in that previous slide was to break the linkages in time, the fact that in reality, 1 hour follows another. And we know that demand for electricity varies, you know, it's low overnight, picks up during the day. Of course, we know that solar power has a daily pattern, but the wind power, it does have some kind of daily pattern, but it's not so strong. So what about the kind of peak day of residual demand? Well, we can see how that orange line would look on a day it's pretty low wind, but pretty high demand. And even if we were able to be flexible and move electric vehicle charging or heat pump use to kind of have an ideal flattened profile, there's still a lot of energy to serve. And that suggests this need for stores of energy, whether it's storable fuels or something else. And just to get a handle for the volume of that, a week of such days would suggest the need for something between 6 and 7 terawatt hours. You know, sort of a calm week, this dunkelflaute, you know, kind of dark doldrums kind of period. And we can compare with our storage capacity that we have at the moment. And also how much energy storage we would have in batteries in electric vehicles. So there's opportunities there to make use of some of that. Okay, I've not got a lot of time, so let's move on to the next slide. Right, so we need some flexibility, things that we can flex to meet that variation in residual demand. You know, flexible demand comes into that. Batteries do as well. We can flex imports or exports over interconnectors. But there are long periods, as I said, when wind and solar isn't really available. Okay, we've just gone backwards accidentally there somehow. There we go. So you can see these different resources that can meet different kinds of flexibility requirements. Can they be moved quickly in response to changes? Well, some of them, yes. Can you plan them in advance? Can you schedule what their output will be tomorrow or the day after and be confident it will be delivered next week? You can choose. You can't pick and choose when the wind blows. And if it is producing energy, will that persist? Will it last for a long time? So one of the kind of market challenges is how do we get the right mix? Okay, the next slide. Now, there's a need for resilience. And again, Bethany mentioned this. And we can think of it in terms of disturbances that affect the energy system. And here I'm thinking maybe most particularly about electricity as we electrify more and more. Things that happen very quickly and also require a very quick response to stop those adverse impacts. And we've seen some examples of those, say, you know, August 2019, when things happened very fast and within a few minutes, lots of, well, in particular, rail supplies down in the southeast of England have been disrupted. We've seen some quite unexplained oscillations of power on the GB system in recent years. Storms can affect things. We maybe remember a few, such as Storm Arwen from, I think it was November the year before last. And then on the longer timescale, where do we get that energy from? Moving energy perhaps between different seasons. So what I want to emphasize here is that the kind of operation of a low carbon power system with very different technologies on it, in particular, wind and solar variable resources, and the power electronic converters that they use are very, very flexible. But what do you do with them? It's not a done deal. It's not obvious how you make all of this work. It's obvious we have to decarbonize, but the technologies and how they interact is not completely clear yet. So there's opportunities for innovation. Next slide. And challenges in terms of where all this flexibility might come from. So this is actually quite an old picture from 2014 that just starts to illustrate some of the opportunities of many different resources we could use, but also the challenges in managing very large volumes of data, lots of communication and control. Okay, and the next slide. So I might sum up some of those engineering challenges, operability challenges in terms of these 6. So I've talked about managing control, I've mentioned managing control interactions on the power electronics, that residual demand duration curve. There's also an issue around, well, I think it's a solvable issue about loss of inertia from the large rotating plant. It's a question of having the right stores of energy that you can access quickly enough. And I think we've got the ways to do that. But kind of the volumes and the market mechanisms are maybe not completely proven yet. Short circuit currents, important things, such that, for example, protection on the network works correctly. What challenges and opportunities will there be around that? And then a basic one of getting enough network capacity, and then all these distributed resources, generation, small scale generation and flexible demand. So we've got to utilize the assets to the maximum so that we don't overbuild, make full use of low carbon electricity when it's available, and ensure that the electricity supply is sufficiently resilient. Okay, you can push the button again. But there's opportunities around this. And I think the slides will be available afterwards for you to kind of mull over some of these in a bit more at your leisure. Okay, so I'll move on as well. Leave some time for Richard to come in and give some his perspectives. But he's digging in a little bit more depth about some of the technologies, especially the digitalization and the communication and what that requires. A lot of it, I think, with all those resources and all the opportunities they present, is about reducing the system operator's burden, giving them some means of making use of those resources in a reliable way, in an effective way, and designing the frameworks to unlock access to those resources. And another thing as well, I think is really important, is about the expertise to develop the methods and the tools and maintain them and adapt them as we learn more and more about how they behave. Okay, and let's move on to the next slide, nearly at the end. Okay, now here's some things I'm going to unpack a little bit, because it's not only about the technologies. I've mentioned markets quite a few times. So here's I've just pushed the button again just a couple of times. There we go. So there's the physical layer, talks about the energy that's being transferred between different places, and power, of course, means the rate of transfer or the rate of production. But how is that controlled such that the system remains stable and the limits on the network are respected? And there's also a lot of commercial arrangements, the different parties that are involved in this. How can they make sure that their costs are covered? And who's responsible for paying them and commissioning the services? So move on to the next slide. There's going to be a few button pushes here. So we can think of all these different actors in the system, large and small consumers, generators, the system operator, the distribution network operators, and all the retailers or suppliers with whom most of us have contracts. They've all got these relationships with each other. How can we make this sort of sometimes quite messy structure and set of regulatory codes and commercial arrangements work effectively with the technologies that we're developing? Okay, and the next slide, I'm nearly at the end of my piece. So I finish off with an appeal, really, about just recalling what we're trying to achieve through this innovation. And as Bethany said, we're about clean energy. We want to make sure that energy is cheap as it can be. There are all sorts of commercial actors involved in this. What sort of business models do they depend on? Can they be proven? Fundamentally, it's about meeting people's needs for energy and the different ways that they use energy. If we move on just one more slide, my appeal is kind of to recall that it's not only about the engineering. Many of these innovation projects in the last sort of 10 or 15 years have quite understandably and quite correctly focused on specific technical outcomes. But there are broader impacts than that in terms of, for example, energy policy, investment, impact on energy users. But also projects need to be structured in the right way to generate evidence concerning the impact of a proposed innovation and to understand whatever risks they might bring. So we've had innovation in terms of bringing down, for example, the cost of wind energy. but the sorts of technologies that they bring, for example, reduction of inertia or how you control the converters, they bring opportunities, but also risks if we don't get the software right, basically. And we need the evidence and the methods used, and the evidence and the methods and the data used to generate the evidence to be published and accessible by all, to build upon that learning and make sure that energy users' needs are finally going to be served. Okay, that's me. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Keith. I would like to hand over to Richard Knight.
Thank you, Bethany. Just confirm you can hear me, okay?
All good.
Excellent, okay. Well, thanks very much. Thanks a lot, Keith, for that. So, just by means of introduction, my name is Richard Knight. I'm Director for Strategy and Technology at PNDC. You probably know us as Power Networks Demonstration Centre based up in Cumbernauld. I've only got 10 minutes for a very, very big question, so I'm just going to scratch the surface. But fundamentally, what I'm going to try and do is to provide some perspectives on the innovation opportunities around Challenge 2 from a technology agnostic organisation. So I'll just start off with a brief introduction to who we are, so you're aware of where I'm coming from. So PNDC is one of the University of Strathclyde's industry-facing innovation centres, opened in 2013, and we're focused on accelerating and de-risking technologies through the mid-range TRL, from sort of proof of concept through towards commercial reality. Focused on energy historically, but now moving into whole systems, marine and aerospace technologies as well. We're a team of 50 people at the moment, and you can see a picture of our facilities there on the bottom of the screen. As I said before, based in Cumbernauld. What we have at Cumbernauld is in effect, a replica of a conventional distribution network you'd find anywhere in the UK. Overhead lines, cables, associated equipment, everything you'd see on a normal distribution system, coupled with some fairly elaborate simulation and modeling capabilities that we can use in combination to test and demonstrate and validate new technologies prior to their commercial application on the main grid system. We operate multiple engagement models, so we have a collaborative program of research with members. We do collaborative programs of work with other stakeholders, but fundamentally we're an open access facility there to support industry in the UK to accelerate through that mid-range TRL section. And just to finish, as I mentioned before, although our history is electrical systems, we are evolving into the whole system space, and we now have 3 program areas: networks, heat and transport, and we shall be opening some new facilities in early 2024, focusing in the whole systems area. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So these are personal observations based on the information that's been published relating to Challenge 2. I'm just going to try and reflect on some of the key things I've picked out that hopefully will help those wanting to participate in the program to develop good programs of work. So the first one is there's an underlying requirement across all the challenges actually to remember that ultimately we're trying to deliver an equitable transition to net zero. That's hugely important, something that we certainly very much supportive of. And now there are a number of areas where, certainly around 3 of the SIF programme, there's an increasing focus. And I've drawn those 5 out here. So the first one is consumers, much more focused on consumers, particularly vulnerable consumers, but increasing their role in participation within the net zero transition. And that's not just about reducing bills, it's about actually getting them engaged, providing services potentially, but also ensuring that the solutions that are developed during the innovation process are consumer friendly. Digital, I think Keith's already alluded to that. There's a whole plethora of digital issues, how to ensure that across the whole system, the right digital technologies are brought to bear. Third sub-bullet there is around new power network hardware and operational approaches. And again, that goes back to the comments that Keith was making about the changing characteristics of generation and what that means for stability and overall system management. Flexibility, which is related to that. Now, Challenge 2 calls out long duration storage specifically, and makes a recognition that further innovation is required to understand the roles of different types of storage. So not just electric storage, so heat storage, hydrogen, mechanical storage, and potentially demand-side solutions as well, in providing services to the system to enable a secure and safe operational regime. And then finally, again, Keith already alluded to this, but there's an absolute need to ensure that the market innovations are developed in parallel and alongside technology innovations to ensure that the whole system level, all these things fit together in a way that's conducive to a net zero transition. And the final comment really is that across all of these, whole system innovation, whole system thinking, and increasing cross-sector collaboration, gas networks, electricity networks, working together to manage these challenges. And then drilling down a little bit into some example innovation opportunities relating to Challenge 2. There are many, many opportunities, and these are just a handful I picked out to stimulate some thinking perhaps. The first one relates to consumers and integrating consumers with technology and markets. So whilst there are many good consumer trials that have already taken place, many very good technology trials, but also very many, well, a number of market innovation trials that have happened, bolting all these things together into an integrated set of trials, I think is something that would add an awful lot of value to understand how the balance between consumer interventions, technology interventions, market interventions needs to be balanced going forward. But ultimately, that will help consumers participate in the innovation process. Management of peak system demand, again, this is something that is a consequence of increased electrification, for example, but understanding the balance between different types of flexibility solutions, storage solutions, balance between short-term and long-duration technologies, how to engage consumers and help them participate in the delivery of services to the system. So not just being a passive recipient of the end product, but actually contributing to the delivery of system solutions. And then how do you actually make all this happen and work in practice? So that potentially a number of different types of flexibility innovations that will need to be implemented to deliver a safe and secure system longer term. But at the whole system level, how do you make that all work and integrate and operate as an integral system? I mentioned in bullet 3 multi-vector storage. Again, this is how different types of storage, heat, electricity, hydrogen, mechanical, should be operated. Where's the best place for them to be participating in energy markets of the future, for example? Long duration storage is building on the good work that's already taking place through the UK government's long duration energy storage programme. So scaling up trials, delivering larger scale activities that test out and prove these technologies on real networks. And then finally, the digital solutions that fit around all of these things to make the system work properly. And cybersecurity as well. Okay, next slide, please. And just to finish off, I've got 3 examples of ongoing activities that are relevant to this space. There are many, many others, obviously. So I'll just start with the Whole Energy Systems Accelerator. This is an innovation that's being developed by ourselves at PNDC in collaboration with our partners, Energy Systems Catapult. And this is about plugging that gap between consumers, networks, and policy. It's developing a innovation facility where we can test and trial the interactions between real people in homes, networks, and policy frameworks to understand how they might interact going forward. And fundamentally, what we're doing is digitally interconnecting the living labs for the Catapult's living lab of consumers. So that's around 2,000, I think now, highly instrumented homes across the UK, which gives very good insight into how consumers interact in real time with the energy network. And then on the other side, our hardware and demonstration facilities at PNDC, digitally interconnecting those to enable us to look at how interventions at both ends. So, for example, if you have a region where everybody's buying a heat pump, what does that do to the networks? And then what can you do on the network side in parallel to accommodate that increased penetration of heat pumps? What additional services can you provide from the network side to make it all integrate in a nice, convenient way? What we're doing additionally with this is building a market simulator as well to enable us to look at different pricing and control pricing signals that might be needed on both sides of the equation to make it all happen in practice. And just to mention to Scottish Government, thankful to them for their support in progressing this innovation. Thank you. And then just a couple of project examples. So this is the first one that uses our Whole Energy Systems Accelerator in practice, and it's a collaboration with UK Power Networks and NIA project focused on looking at how after diversity maximum demand, ADMD might change in the longer term as we progress through towards the low carbon future. And that's involving the Living Lab. It's looking at real homes, trialing with real consumers, and then clustering those and looking at the interventions that can be brought to bear on the network side to deliver the secure system, but also then what it all means for the planning process in terms of future ADMD calculations. And then finally, thank you. Just one example of one of the projects that's currently being taken through the UK government's longer duration energy storage demonstration program. This is an innovation by a company called SunAmp, and it's the trial of 100 SunAmp devices in homes. So looking at the interactions of that technology with consumers, but also with the network, and our involvement as PNDC is through one of the main project participants you can see on the right-hand side there, and providing testing and demonstration services to support the acceleration of that technology through the TRL scale. So I think that's me. Happy to answer any questions or take any questions offline, obviously, later.
Thank you so much, Richard, Keith. I really appreciate your time and for providing some greater insight into this challenge. We're going to take questions to the end because we have a Q&A function. So towards the end, we'll look into those questions. I'm going to jump ahead to what does a good SIF project look like? Well, it has to be problem-centric. We have the discovery alpha beta configuration so that we can address one problem and then expand on the solution as we go through the 3 phases. It needs to be user oriented. So, who's going to benefit from the problem that you're addressing? It needs to be outcome driven. So there needs to be a commercial product or service that is relevant to different community segments and or network users. It needs to be well structured. So, the assessors, Ofgem, will be looking for a really robust methodology and risk management strategy within your application to the SIF. It also needs to be additional and complementary. So the projects need to build off relevant previous network and energy innovation and really needs to avoid duplication. You're also encouraged to examine linking up with complementary projects and programs, and we do that extensively within SIF projects and with external projects as well. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kate, who's going to take you through take you through some of the previous work and also how you can get involved.
Yeah, I'm not going to touch too much on this one. I should introduce myself first, just in case, but I'm Kate. I'm also one of the innovation leads on the Strategic Innovation Fund. So like Beth just mentioned in the last slide, we don't really want a duplication of projects. We want complementary projects. So here is some projects that you should investigate for this particular challenge. Again, this detail will be all in the pack at the end. And it's also worth mentioning that we have the round 2 show and tells, which some projects within that space may be of interest if you're thinking of exploring a project in this round. So if people were here before, you've probably heard me speaking about this quite a bit. I don't want to take too much time. I really want some time for questions, but I suppose the headlines are Giant Leap Together is our operating model. This is an annual process. We've done the challenge setting piece and now we're in ideation. There is a whole ton of support out there for you, and this the Giant Leap Together bit, we really work together with innovators to really develop ideas and get you in front of the networks and really get the best proposals going through to the application stage. There's a ton of events. My colleagues will share them in the chat. I'd really encourage you to read the challenge document to find out if any of these events are suitable for you. If I'm going to plug just a couple of things that I want to flag to you is we do have 2 more in-depth challenge sessions for the last 2 challenges. The call for ideas, so if you've got an idea and you think it's ready already to go through to the pitching stage, submit it on the portal. That's open today. And we do have a specific ideation workshop covering cybersecurity and long duration storage, which there might be a ton of people on this session which would like to attend that. You can register to your interest in attending through one of those links that my colleagues will put in the chat. If anybody has any questions on the activities that we are promoting here, please just reach out through our SIF generic inbox. We do respond to emails from that. Perhaps one of my colleagues can put that email address in the chat as well. For now, though, I really want to focus on questions, so I will hand back to my colleague Manu and Beth.
Thank you, Kate. So yeah, I can kind of look at the questions, and then you know, Beth, David, and Kate, I think there's a kind of few questions for you. We'll take it from the top. Beth or David, I mean, the questions from Clark is, is it only one regulated energy network required? Wasn't it two in the previous rounds? David, maybe?
Yes, it is only one that's required to lead a project. That was true in previous rounds as well, but in some of the previous challenges, a partnership requirement was that there had to be a second energy network on board. For this particular challenge, that's not one of the partner requirements for any of the scope themes, but if you're looking at any of the other challenges, you should check the partner requirements.
Thanks, David. Beth, to you now. Can you please provide examples of disruptive computing technology to improve system visibility, performance, or cybersecurity?
Yes, so for system visibility, you may have heard everyone shouting the word digital twins. It's a very popular type of disruptive computing technology. For people who are not sure what a digital twin is, you have one in your phone. It's called Google Maps, and that's a digital twin of the world. And it's the same sort of thing we can do with energy networks as well. So that gives you greater visibility and ability to input data and react to data as well. For performance, there's a really interesting technology called SPAD photonics, which is a method of detecting single photons to then attach to a sort of AI software to create images. So effectively, you can integrate these tiny little optical fibers into your assets to take images for maintenance, which would previously be carried out by humans. And then for cybersecurity, in the quantum space, you have something called quantum key distribution, which is a method of encryption to increase the security of communications in the power networks, which is a massive topic at the moment. So hopefully that gives you a taste of all the different cutting edge tools that can be used to disrupt the market at the moment.
Thank you, Beth. One from Rob, is there a written definition of long duration storage? If so, what is it?
Well, the definition at the moment from the Long Duration Energy Storage Council is simply a technology that allows us to power our networks with renewable energy. So it's really quite broad. So I guess, what you're looking for is just be creative. There is no specific definition of what we want, as long as it's innovative and it can be carried out at the lowest cost to the consumer.
I think I would just add, I mean, the key thing is that it serves a purpose. Yeah. That the period of time over which you're moving the energy is useful or necessary in terms of achieving, in the end, reliable supply of energy to the end user, given the variation of conditions of how much demand is needed in the winter or the summer, overnight or in the day, and the variation of wind and solar availability in particular. So there are markets, market opportunities, I think, for moving energy within a day right now that you could say work quite well. But lots of work, I think, in terms of extending that time frame, which is where I think there's a lot of attention to, longer duration storage.
Yeah, and I think also something to point out in this challenge eligibility is that it's not just long duration storage. We're looking for, multi-day and inter-season types of storage as well. So it is quite a broad scope, and we can bring in a lot of learnings from the gas networks who are very advanced in storage technologies as well. I don't want people to think that this is just a electricity system problem.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. Keith. I think we broadly use the definition of greater than 12 hours as kind of base of modeled in the long duration storage analysis. But yeah, as Keith and Beth were saying, follow the system needs, please. So the next question, maybe David or Kate, if we submit an early project idea through the call by end of June, is there scope for a discovery project to start during 2023, a couple of months after the first closing?
The short answer is no. The reason for that is we have an ideation process, so you can submit your ideas between June and August. The last date is the 11th of August. We do them in tranches to try and manage the level of ideas that come through. But the application window Beth covered before, it would open in September and close in November, with projects being awarded funding by the 1st of March 2024.
Thanks, Kate. Question from Joe around, is firm power from tidal stream and wave power appropriate for this call? I'm assuming the follow-on question is to enhance grid stability. Is that within scope?
I mean to take it, Manu.
Yeah, go for it.
So we've got to be clear of what in the SIF funding is eligible to be put towards, and it's not the research and development or collaborative R&D of generation technologies. So we are interested in the integration of different forms of generation, but we take it from a very technology and generation agnostic point of view. So really, we're looking for the innovation within the energy networks to be able to leverage that kind of power generation and be able to use it at the most efficient and cheap times. But we're not looking to develop marine or tidal energy technologies in the same way that we wouldn't put funding towards wind turbine blade development or any other form of generation technology.
Yeah, I think there's an indication, David, maybe for specifically for enhancing grid stability, but I guess that falls into the integration scope that you're talking about. I think those kinds of things we might consider, yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to skip this. If we, so the next question is around IP. If we put forward ideas, how can we protect our IP, and can we do this under NDA?
So we wouldn't expect energy networks to be doing an NDA for the initial pitching. We do appreciate that the innovators would need to protect their IP. There are rules for SIF in the governance document around IP and what would be acceptable. What we'd ask for the innovators is that you can share enough to give the initial proposal to the networks to see if there's any flavour to take it up thereafter, and then it would be up to the individual networks around if they wanted to take up an NDA.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, it's definitely worth looking at the IP section of the SIF governance document as well, just so that you're kind of aware of how the IP protection works. Next question is, do startups need to find network partners by themselves before they submit their ideas? Or would the SIF team make those connections as ideas get into discovery funded projects? Kate?
Yeah, we've got you. So through the SIF process, the idea is that we can help make the introductions to the networks. I see some of the networks have put in the chat around direct engagement, if that is suitable. But the call for ideas process is to reach out to many networks in one go and make formal introductions for ideas that they want to take forward, not just through SIF, but other funding channels. So we don't expect you to have a network partner on board. As part of the call for ideas, there's a little section about partner aspirations, so you could let us know which types of partner or which type of network you'd like to be introduced to. That doesn't just have to stick to the networks as well. It could be things like you might be looking for a local government, you might be looking for other partners, for example, in the requirements Beth set out, but we very much help to develop the partnerships.
Thanks, Kate. And I think that links to the question that Sarah had as well. So I'm just going to mark that as done. I think that's that. Beth, question to you. If an idea straddles two challenges, do you suggest we focus primarily on just one?
Yes, I would suggest focusing on just one. But if you apply to one challenge in discovery and then you find through your work in discovery that actually it fits better into another challenge, you can actually submit into another challenge for alpha. But yes, it is for funding, it is one challenge.
But just going to go through this. I think Keith is answering some of these questions. So are all SIF submissions treated as confidential and commercially sensitive? David, okay.
The proposal does have a data sharing agreement statement within your call for ideas that we'd be asking innovators to accept. But yes, it's very much controlled within who we share it with in the energy networks. But there would be an expectation that you're willing to share your ideas with the networks. But appreciate, the call for ideas is limited wording. We don't expect you to share your secret sauce far and wide at that point.
Thanks, Kate. Maybe one for Beth.
Manu, could I just touch on moving into the discovery phase? So you'll see when you look at the call for ideas that you don't have to really be bringing background IP to that proposal to have an initial conversation. And even beyond that, in the discovery phase, it's very much an information gathering period. So you're not really taking background IP and developing it further. You're really getting to the crux of what the problem statement that you're working on with the networks are. So in most cases, there's very low IP risk for the discovery phase. And then we do accept in the later phases for you to propose alternative IP arrangements than are listed in the SIF governance document if it's felt that some sort of protective commercial arrangement is needed.
Thanks, David. One on the kind of disruptive computing technologies and how we measure outcomes out of that, maybe David and Beth. Is there any reason, I guess, why the outputs is measured by using more of that disruptive technology? The question is, doesn't this not encourage kind of using tech for the sake of tech rather than having a specific network or customer outcome?
I think at the SIF, we recognize that the digitalization of a lot of energy sector processes is key to enabling net zero, which is why we're looking for disruptive technologies. We want to change some of those legacy processes. We're not trying to bring in certain technologies for the sake of bringing them in. We want to be able to solve specific problems which the energy networks face. I mean, it's not prescriptive. I'm not sure what else to add, really.
Just to highlight as well that our evaluation of benefits isn't based on things like the number of technologies rolled out. It's really grounded in consumer benefits, satisfaction, price reductions, carbon reductions. So they're the basis on which we evaluate success of projects. But we always kind of tread this fine line between focusing on outcomes, but not being very prescriptive about the way to get those outcomes, whilst also needing to nudge the sector in the direction of adopting new practices and technologies. And sometimes we need to go a little bit harder on that nudge just to get the ball rolling down the hill. But ultimately, we're more interested in the consumer outcomes. You're right.
Thanks, David. Somebody's kind of typing. So maybe one on, maybe we have time for like a couple of questions. Under challenge 2, theme 2, Beth, leveraging disruptive computing technologies, is the involvement of innovative data gathering hardware to provide data inputs to computational activities a disqualifier? Is that within scope?
I think it would be in the scope. It may not be the leading part of a project, but it may be a work package within a project, for example. I'm going to throw back a challenge to Clark on that particular one, is that can you use that hardware to reduce the compute time of some of the processes that we need or are going to need in a future energy system? One of the big challenges is that as we become more and more data heavy, we're processing more, we're actually consuming a lot of energy to do those processes. So how can you streamline some of those hardwares and softwares?
True, challenge thrown back. Last question, perhaps, in terms of discovery, can we have a looser definition in discovery, given it's part of the purpose to kind of create a future alpha and beta phase? And, will we kind of support truly risky and novel projects and not setting the barriers too high? Maybe we can finish off with that question.
I think discovery, it is a 2 to 3 month phase. So we are, we know that it's a very short time frame to deliver something. So we are quite loose, I guess, compared to alpha and beta. But we still want you to have an initial problem that you're going to set out to address. And, the scope of that might change slightly as you go through discovery. But yeah, we do need that initial grounding.
Cool. I think we've kind of hit the time. So maybe David, back to you for wrapping up the session.
Thanks, Manu. So just to highlight that all the official SIF documentation is published on the ofgem.gov.uk/SIF webpage. That is where the official challenge documents for round 3 are hosted. So please take a look at them. We've got a whole host of upcoming events, so please do look at the links that we've shared to register for those ideation workshops, to book your innovator surgeries, to participate in viewing the show and tells, and also for the call for ideas to submit your idea. If we skip on to the next slide, we've got a whole host of resources that you can help to learn about the Strategic Innovation Fund as a program, but also some of the past work that's been done in our blogs and also our podcast called Bright Spark. We're always looking for new speakers on that podcast. If you've got something to talk about in relation to these challenges, then please do reach out. And a reminder that we are here to support you and answer any questions. So please do just inquire using the SIF_Ofgem at iuk.ukri.org web address. Finally, thank you to Keith and Richard for sharing your wealth of knowledge with everyone here. We hope it's helped people to really stimulate their thinking about how they can solve some of these system challenges and ultimately deliver a net zero power system. Let your imaginations run wild, be big, bold and ambitious, and we look forward to seeing some of your ideas come in. Thanks to all the team for presenting, and have a good evening.